thinking I'll have another job in 3 months to nearly a year later going, how many more of these applications can I write? Yeah. Listen, your next job is not going to come from a job application. Your next job is going to come from a contact. I'm the world's oldest, youngest academic.
Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to ask that if you're listening today and if you're enjoying the content that I produce on the Reinventor's Mindset, then please hit subscribe or follow on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Your support is what helps me to create these episodes and to continue to explore leadership from the inside. Thank you so much. Welcome to the Reinventor's Mindset, insights about transformation with leaders who've done it from the inside. I'm Ashton Jones and I'm writing a book about class struggle and transformation. Today, I'm speaking with Craig Gilliver, a kid from Bankstown who spent more than 25 years backstage at the country's biggest arts festivals, keeping the show on the road and the artists off the ledge. Then he did something stranger than any of it. He walked into a business school with no business degree and started teaching leaders how to lead through story. Somewhere along the way, he earned a master's in writing, started writing screenplays, and turned up in the pages of the New York Times. The last time Craig and I caught up, he'd just published an academic paper on breakfast cereal and religion, which tells you most of what you need to know about how his mind works. Welcome, Craig. Let's dive in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashton. It's great to be here.
Now, Craig, I wanted to start by taking you back to Bankstown, where you grew up. And I wanted to just kind of learn a little bit around what that environment was like. And what did making something of yourself even mean back then?
I was privileged for Bankstown, and I went to the local Catholic school, DLSL Bankstown. Hi, Brother Rory, if you're listening. And then there was a separate college, which was a feeder school for 5 different DLSL schools, because this is back in the day where most fellas went and got a trade.
Yes.
It was, you finished school when you were 16, and then to elect to go to year 12 was because you had real intentions of doing something, or doing something at university, doing a profession. They were the days of wine and Whitlam, or at least where, a fella from the western suburbs could go to university on merit and didn't have to worry about how much money their parents had. So I went to basically what was a selective college for the last 2 years. And it was, in effect, like just a systemic Catholic school, but it was set up specifically for, young fellas who had some ideas, who wanted to go to university. There were like 200 students from 5 entire schools that actually went there. Benilde High Bankstown doesn't exist anymore in that form. Hi, Brother Quentin, if you're listening. And so I went there and I wanted to do journalism. I didn't quite get enough marks to get into UTS. That was the hot ticket in journalism at that time. Yep. So I went to Macquarie. I met a whole bunch of kids from the North Shore that I'd never met before. And then I ended up getting a literature degree, an undergraduate degree in literature. And that was kind of how it all kicked off. But in Bankstown, you weren't expected to go to university.
You were going to be on the tools, right? Yeah. What was their reaction like when you said, I want to go and study literature?
Mum kind of was sanguine about it. I only had Mum by the time that I was that age. And Mum, I think, asked me once, what are you doing? And I said, this semester? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I'm doing a unit of Australian literature, and I'm doing a unit of sociology, and I'm doing a unit of Shakespearean and Elizabethan drama. And she kind of looked at me quizzically and said, will that help you get a job? And I went, oh, yeah, of course it will. And she went, oh, all right then. But, as supportive as, she's just like, okay, well,
Well, I admire you for doing it, Craig, because I wanted to be a journalist as well. I did work experience at 2GB Radio. Thank you, Mike Carlton. He wrote the letter that let me come along and experience it. And I didn't have the courage to go down that path because I thought I wouldn't make much money off of it.
It was well, you didn't and even back then it was tough to get into.
Yeah,
I did work experience at the Torch, the local paper in Bankstown, and I did
awesome.
I actually got to do work experience at Triple J.
Oh, very cool.
That was very cool. Yes, that was extraordinary.
Yeah. Do you look back on that as sort of a formative moment as to why you then ended up spending so much of your early adult life around musicians, around artists?
That was because that's what me and my friends did. Music was that
was the thing.
There was no internet. There was no videotape.
Yeah.
If you wanted to see live music, you went to see the band, and it was cool because they were musos and you were hanging out. The only time in my life I've been a member of a cool club was, of course, I had a membership with the trade union club, and we'd be up till 3:00 in the morning at the trade union club, kind of like, watching Box the Jesuit or kind of like the Johnnies or something like that. I saw the Dead Kennedys at the trade union club.
Cool.
So like, that was just what I was into. And I would read the NME and the New Musical Express from England, and I would read RAM, Rock Australia magazine, and occasionally Sounds or whatever would come across my desk, and Rolling Stone, and you just listen to the radio, and you would have your favorite artists, and you would collect them, and you would go to parties.
Well, interestingly enough, another thing we share in common, I didn't know this, but I wrote for a music website when I was at University of Sydney. The website's still going, the AU Review, if anyone wants to check it out. It only reviewed live music, and it's quite nice to think, Craig, that there's a bit of a renaissance again with younger Aussies experiencing live music, right? Like we went through a period where streaming was really starting to dominate, and now I feel like there's been a bit of a flight back to live music.
I think that it can't be replicated.
Yeah.
In
a world of AI.
When you first go and see a large overseas band, like the first one I saw, and I say overseas band because they were an international band by that stage. I saw AC/DC, and I remember feeling like I'm being punched in the chest by the bass drum.
Yeah.
You get that rush, and then to actually see it, it's like, oh my Lord, that's actually David Bowie on stage, or that's actually Tom. I've been lucky enough to see Tom Waits twice.
Oh wow.
And it's just like, well, that's actually Tom Waits.
Yeah.
I'm in the presence of a genius. I've seen Paul McCartney.
Wow.
I've seen Ringo Starr. I've been from Me to You in a concert away from Ringo Starr.
Yeah.
There's a lot of excitement still involved with that. Resonance, exactly.
Tell me about that chapter of your life for the people at home. Like, exactly what did you do? What was that period of your life like when you were involved in sort of the arts and the music scene? And are you still involved today?
Yeah, I still work with a local artist called Perry Keys, and Perry's a great mate of mine, and I still do work for him. I don't do kind of any major festival work or that anymore. Like, the carnival's kind of moved on. During COVID, I pivoted into academia, but I still have great friends. I'm going to be in Edinburgh in a couple of weeks. I'm going to see some friends from when I worked on Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yes.
What happened was I was involved in the Centenary of Federation, which was in 2001, the celebration of Australia as 100 years as an independent country. And there were Centenary of Federation ambassadors, and so I got to look after people who were, representing the state and going to rural and regional areas. I did a bit of work with Ivor from Icehouse, and that was really cool because, we talk about old gigs and talk about Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, who he really loves, and Bowie, of course, he really loves. Then one of my other colleagues from that job got a job at Sydney Festival, and she saw that I kind of had a knack for looking after people and anticipating a need and making sure they had everything they needed to do their job. And she called me up one day and said, "Are you free in January?" And I said, "Oh, I can be. What do you need?" And she said, "I've got a gig that I think you'll be really good at, and I think you'll really want to do it, but you have to be free between these dates." And I went, "What is it?" And she said, "Can't tell you right now. Nothing's confirmed, but, would you be up for it?" I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Have you got the Elvis Costello album with the Brodsky Quartet?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "No reason, but can I borrow it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So she borrowed my copy of the Juliet letters, and that gave me a big hint about what she was talking about. So that was my first kind of that must have been in, 2006 or 7 or something.
Right. Yeah.
And Fergus Linehan, who was running Sydney Festival at the time, brought out Elvis Costello, and he did a week's worth of concerts in different guises, worked with the orchestra, did a Brodsky Quartet, did the Juliet letters live.
Yes.
It was amazing. And I got to meet one of my actual real heroes, and it was so thrilling. Little Craig from Bankstown was very impressed with Big Craig. Do you know what I mean?
At that moment,
Yeah,
What do you think that corporate professionals or business leaders could learn from the creative act, from the artists?
You know what I noticed? The thing you see when you know performance, you see them perform.
Yeah.
You don't really get to see them backstage. There's more of that now with the internet, but back then you didn't.
So you've seen both sides. Yeah.
I've seen through the curtain. And the thing I noticed about people is someone like Elvis Costello or someone like Lou Reed takes their work very serious. There would be a debrief in the car with, Elvis and his road manager, Robbie, or whoever was there at the time. How did that go? What was that song like? I think that we should drop that from the set tomorrow night. Do you think we should include this song? And occasionally I'd get asked my opinion because he knew I knew the material, right? Which was a thrill. But there was no creative act continued. There was no resting on the laurels. right?
Yeah.
Everything was being reviewed all the time. How can we make this better?
Yes, yes.
Right? So I think that's a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of, oh, okay, we got this, right?
Yeah.
It's that, no, this thing that we're doing is worth doing, and it's worth doing well, and we can do it better.
There's a process, and there's grit, and there's refinement.
There's refinement. There's review.
Yeah.
So I guess, off the top of my head, that's one thing that I would say, just not to rest on your laurels.
Yeah.
Get the process there, but there's always room for improvement. There's continuous room for improvement.
I must admit, until I'd started writing again recently, really trying to apply myself to writing, I think a lot of people have this sort of idea or concept in their mind that great artists, they're kind of impresarios that just sort of get up on stage and this magic just sort of spills forth. But everything worth doing, you kind of have to work hard at it, right? There's very few people that just get up and can blast out, Bohemian Rhapsody, right?
The Cure still rehearse. How long have they been doing that for?
Yeah.
They rehearse.
Exactly.
And they don't just walk in and go, oh, we'll run the set once and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
They rehearse.
Yeah.
All day.
Over and over again.
Yeah. All day.
Yes.
Let's do that again.
That's right.
Like Lou would rehearse. There was no just like, oh, well, I'm the genius Lou Reed and I will jump up and this will spring fully formed.
Yeah.
No, he's got to know. He's got to know what the drum's doing, got to know what the bass player's doing. He has to direct them.
Tell me more about backstage. Can you take me back to a night where it nearly all fell apart, any specific things that you remember, and where were you standing? What do you remember?
Okay, so we did the Berlin shows, right? Another Fergus Linehan kind of production. Sydney Festival did Berlin. Berlin was a very controversial album that Lou did, which at the time was panned, but is now considered to be a work of genius. Yeah. And it uses sound effects and tape noise and stuff. And at the beginning, there is the sound of a party and people pouring drinks. And the first night, I was standing with Hal Wilner, who was Lou's producer and a great, wonderful, wonderful man. Hal was a very creative man. Everybody knew Hal. Everyone wanted to work with Hal. The sound of the effects sound started to go down, and we could still hear this ching, 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 like bells would chime slightly off key, right? And you could see Lou on stage about to hit the first chord going, looking at the sound, the foldback guy, wanting him to turn the sound down. What is that? And I realized we had the door open at the State Theatre because it's so hot backstage there. Right. The Hare Krishnas were marching down George Street, playing cymbals and chanting, right? Yeah. And it just came straight down the stairs, across and onto the stage and got picked up by the mic. Oh,
wow. And everyone's like, what is going on?
Hal goes, what's that? And we go bolting up the stairs. It's at the door. And it was fine, but it was just one of those weird moments. Who could predict that? And how he had to leave the next day and he said, Craig, promise me you'll have that door shut. And I said, on my word, Hal, the door will be shut. Yeah. You didn't want to make Lou angry.
Do you remember any rituals that our artists had before they went on stage to kind of get themselves in the zone? Anything?
Prayer circle. And I say that in a very, very broad way. Brian Wilson and his band would everyone would be in a circle and join hands and say, hey, we're all this together. We're going to entertain these people in Sydney tonight. We've got each other's backs. Positive reinforcement for each other, calling on the forces. I wouldn't say it was religious in any doctrinal way. Yeah. They didn't call on
but it was
specific...
spiritual, right?
It was. Well, and playing music is spiritual. Playing music, it's the closest thing to magic there really is. You can pick up a bit of wood with string on it and think of a melody. And if you have the skill,
bring it into the world.
You bring it into the world and it appears. Yeah. The melody appears. As far as I'm concerned, there is something spiritual about music. My wife and I were talking on the weekend. We saw Bruce Springsteen in Hyde Park. We were lucky to see him a few years ago. And my wife had never seen Bruce Springsteen before. And I was telling her what an emotional experience it is. Yeah. We turned around at one stage and I said, look, and I pointed at a young woman who was with a boyfriend next to us and she was in utter tears. Break down in tears. And I understand that. It hits you.
Well, I'm a Catholic or maybe a lapsed Catholic, and I went to Notre Dame for the first time for a service late last year. Mm-hmm. And I would challenge almost anyone to go into that cathedral and listen to the hymn and not feel moved by it on some sort of primordial level.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's the vibration. It's
exactly.
the chorus of humanity, right?
And that's what those cathedrals were made for.
Yeah,
Those
yeah.
cathedrals were made for listening to choirs and
Yes.
for listening to kind of chanting.
Yes, yes.
It's in the David Byrne book.
Tell me about the transition from that artistic life into the academic life. You touched on the fact it happened around COVID, but it's not obvious to me how literature, journalism, writing leads you to University of Sydney Business School.
I had been a public servant and I had worked on outdoor festivals. I had put on these large outdoor concerts, 3,500, 4,500, 5,000 people. I did outdoor movie festival. I did lots and lots of work with the community. I worked on Eid with the people from Belmore Mosque, which is where they have prayers outside. I had been made redundant. Then COVID came along and it was very difficult to get work.
Yeah.
It was very difficult to get work in the event space because all the events disappeared.
Of course, yeah.
And then a contact from Sydney University called me and said, look, we've got this thing we're doing because of COVID to keep students involved, and there's kind of an event element to it. Would you be interested in that? And I closed the book I was reading and put it to one side and said, yes, I think I've got time for that. And so I came in, and that was the first manifestation of leading in a post-crisis world. That was when I first came on board. And then I got asked if I would like to stay on and kind of like keep the program running because that we'd been given enough funds to kind of get the program running. And then we went from being like an extracurricular activity to actually being an in-curricular activity. Because my contact here knew that I could teach because I taught at TAFE. He said, you should be teaching some of these classes, but you need to have your master's degree. And it was either a master's degree in event management or a master's degree in writing, my two things. And so I chose the master's degree in writing. And as I said, it all comes down to what I consider to be the narrative that we tell ourselves. Like we can only make sense of the world through narrative. About our life, exactly.
Kierkegaard said life must be lived forwards but understood backwards. Right?
Exactly.
There's something really beautiful about what you said around, like a great event is not just a great spectacle. It's a great story. I think about that in the context of, in corporate life, you do these site visits and pitches and things like that. And often the focus is on, if you like, the way that you're going to present, how you're going to show up and use your voice and all that sort of thing. But thinking about the story that you want to tell and convey throughout the course of the proceedings is really powerful.
That's how you're making sense of what you're doing.
Yes.
And that's how you make sense to the people you're presenting to.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
You know?
What did it feel like to be made redundant? How did that affect your sense of self? Because there's a lot of people out there right now going through similar things.
It wasn't great.
Yeah.
I was not a young bloke anymore.
Yeah.
Not to give too much away. I found myself being in situations in job interviews and they'd say, you got down to the last two, but we've given it to the other person. And I'd say, was that other person younger than me? And they go, we couldn't possibly tell you. And I go, okay. And it's like, I bet they were. So it was a matter of thinking I'll have another job in 3 months to nearly a year later going, okay, how much longer, how many more of these applications can I write? But a friend of mine said though to me, who was an event manager who'd been made redundant a little bit before me, he said, we would touch base and have a coffee and talk about our situation. And he'd say, listen, your next job is not going to come from a job application. Your next job is going to come from a contact.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't take that on board.
Believe him, yeah. And it proved right in the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so like one thing led to another at Sydney University. I got a master's degree. I applied for the job that was advertised. I got the job that was advertised. And here we are. I'm the world's oldest, youngest academic.
We'll turn to academia then. Leading in a post-crisis world. As I said, that's where we first met.
Yeah.
A great course, if I could be biased in saying that.
Thank you.
What was the sort of concept behind how you curated that? How did that evolve over the time you ran it?
We worked with Professor Peter Bryan on that and Professor Juliet Overland, and that was their brainchild. Peter worked on a system called Connected Learning at Scale, which is a class system, which is kind of part of the theory that he's developed about education. Peter's like a world leader in digital education and interpreting it and strategizing. So Peter would give us the blueprint, and then Karina and I and the team with Karina Galliano, hello Karina if you're listening, would go out to put it together. And the idea was that there wouldn't be regular lectures. There would be an overarching kind of like 10-minute spiel at the beginning by Peter, and where he would set up the question, and then the points would be illustrated by talking to professionals such as yourself or other academics. And we had people who were small business owners. We had people who worked for large corporations, people who were lawyers, entrepreneurs. Yeah. The idea was that the students could learn about leadership by listening to leaders, and the stories that were being told would be in what we call chunkified So smaller videos, right?
Yep.
And the
Before TikTok was a thing.
Before TikTok was the thing, exactly. And the students could have a lot of agency about who they listened to.
Yes.
I know your background is in insurance. Our students all had aspirations to work for major companies. Yep. They had certain things they had to watch. They could choose if they wanted to listen to a lawyer, if they wanted to listen to someone from, your background. And then that works as resonant learning, what Peter calls resonant learning. The actual lesson or the story that they're hearing at the time, they mightn't be able to apply to what they're doing, but then in 3 years' time, they might come up against a roadblock and they think, oh, what was that thing Ashton Jones said?
Reach into the toolkit. And
reach into the toolkit and it's like, and it resonates with them.
Why post-crisis? What is it about a crisis that requires a different form of leadership? Why that phrase?
It was originally post-COVID world. So we were trying to prime them. We're saying this will finish. And then it's like, well, there's crisis all the time. What's the next crisis going to be? When do we know we're in crisis? And then what do you have to do to lead your team through a crisis?
Yes.
You have to be able to communicate to them. You have to be able to bring them together.
Yes.
We looked at someone like the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Yes. Jacinta
Ardern, and how Jacinta Ardern led people through that crisis in New Zealand, which I think she was exemplary. We had an academic from New Zealand actually talk to us. And we compared that to like someone like Boris Johnson and what he did, which was a totally different style. Students could say, okay, well, why did I like this style better than that style? Why did this work better than that? Who was making meaning for the people? Who was showing empathy to the people? What's the pitch you're giving me? What's the story you're telling me? Exactly. And one of those pitches in that case was, if we all do this now and lock down, I know that we will miss our relatives and our friends, but the sooner we do it, we'll be protecting the least of us.
Yeah.
Whereas another person said, if you don't do what you're told, I'm going to send the cops around.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a fairly stark leadership style.
Different recipes, right? Different story.
Right? Far be it to me to judge which is better, but, that's up to the student learning.
Yeah. What do you think your generation, my generation, all of the current generations kind of misunderstand about Gen Z? Because you're teaching Gen Z, you're about to head to Porto, you told me before this, to present a paper.
Yeah, we're doing a paper.
What do you think about how that generation learns?
I went to university 40 years ago and we had a pen and a paper, as I've got in front of me now, and the lectures weren't recorded.
Yes.
And if you didn't go to the lecture, you had to make sure that somebody...
You caught up somehow, yeah.
Yeah, you caught up somehow. Someone had good notes. 40 years before I went to university was World War II. Freaks me out to say that. Yeah. But so I would not have expected to learn the same way people did during the war. I would not have expected to have to go to a lecture and sit there in a mortarboard and a gown and stand up when the lecturer walked in. 40 years before that, people had slate. They didn't have paper, Yeah. So I would not expect to have been taught as people were taught in the 1940s. So I shouldn't expect to have to teach the same way in 2026 as people were taught in 1986.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to understand that there is that gap and that people who are digital natives take on information in different ways.
Differently, yeah.
Right? So if we present them with alternatives, so it's like when we made Braille or we made talking newspapers, you presented someone with a medium that they could readily utilize. Engage with, right?
Yeah.
So they didn't miss out on anything. In this sense, we're doing more taped lectures.
Yes.
Specifically, leading in a post-crisis world, LPC, we had those chunkified lectures.
Yes.
And as you said before, people watch TikTok now.
Yes.
Young people, if they need to know how to do something, they will look up how to do it on YouTube. There will be a video.
Yes.
If they need to know how to change a tire, they'll go to TikTok and look up change a tire.
Yes,
right?
yes.
They might get a few kind of singy dancey things first, but eventually someone will say, this is how you use a jack, and you put the parking brake on and you lift it up, undo the nuts before you lift it off the ground, otherwise the wheel will spin, etc., etc. Just like your dad might have taught you or your mum might have taught you in years gone by,
Yeah.
So we have to be prepared to keep up with what's happening, the digital transformation that's taken place. People have 24/7 access to TikTok, to YouTube,
information
media, right? And we have to still be able to allow them to access the information that we want to give them and still teach them to be critical thinkers.
When I studied, there was a big focus on, for brighter students, for example, they get bored easily. So, how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them on track with their studies? In the current environment where, there's so much engaging content, it's just at everyone's fingertips. How do you keep a student kind of engaged in the learning process through a semester or through a 3-year course? Like, is that art, I guess?
That's a very good question. And I don't have that answer readily at hand. I know what I do, and that's based on things that, like Peter encourages us to do. I will, as much as possible in a tutorial, get them to do things that don't involve a computer. It kind of seems to contradict what I just said, but I have a particular exercise where I get them to write a children's book at the beginning of the semester. I stole that from a friend of mine at McGill University for my innovation and entrepreneurship students. I say, here's 2 sheets of folded A3 paper.
Yes.
And you have to write a story that a 5-year-old could understand.
Love it.
And you have to illustrate it. Everyone's story is called My Fantastic Invention.
Oh, okay, cool.
Right?
Love it.
And they're given, texters, trademark, felt tip pens and pencils.
Yeah.
And they're told to write a story and they get excited about it. And then they go, oh, hang on. And they have to have a beginning, middle, end.
Yes.
So I'm teaching them the idea of pitching, telling a story.
Yep.
They get to use their imagination. I said, it can be science fiction. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
Yesterday's science fiction is today's fact. So, just make up something. It doesn't matter that it's technologically impossible. A lot of our students are from a quant background as well.
Yeah.
So they have a bit of difficulty. What do you mean? What's the answer though, Craig? What should I make my invention? It's like, no. You can't look this answer up in the back of the book. The answer has to be what you want it to be. And they kind of have to let go of that kind of quant thinking.
Well, I think I'm going to use that technique in my next innovation workshop at work. I'll get all the execs to write a children's story and see what comes of it. Yeah.
It's more difficult than you think.
Yeah, I can imagine, right?
Because you have to pitch something to someone who's 5.
Yeah. Break it down in a way that anyone can understand. There's a real art to it.
Exactly, and it's a bit of fun. And it kind of gets them off guard.
Yeah, it breaks the ice a bit. Yeah.
So, there you go.
I'm going to stay with writing. I understand you're now writing some screenplays.
I am. I'm actually doing a PhD by creative practice.
Oh, fantastic. Tell me more about that and tell me more about the screenplays.
Well, I did an MA at a university in the UK called Falmouth University, which is a small university. It's not one of their kind of like larger universities, but it specializes in writing and has 4 or 5 different streams of writing: technical writing, creative writing, screenplays. I didn't do the screenplays. I did the comedy writing aspect of it. They also do a lot of video game. A lot of graphic artists go there and learn how to make video games. So there's a video game industry in the UK, and that University of Falmouth actually kind of produce people who work in that and work in movies and TV. Yep. And so I went back to do my MA there, and for my major project, I wrote 2 episodes of a self-devised show on television, which, is not, I'm told it's on the desk of someone at the ABC. I'm not holding my breath, though.
Fingers crossed.
I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath. Kitty Flanagan hasn't called me up yet, but it's, it's an amazing exercise to actually look at this thing that I've looked at for years,
and bring it to life.
Scripted comedy, and actually do it myself and go through the process.
Have you made it through the ups and downs? I ask this from a place of someone who is writing himself right now, who's come back to writing after 20 years of not picking up the pen regularly. How do you make it through it?
We got taught a system.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm
writing.
Okay, all right then. So for something like, a television show, you think, who are the characters? In my case, it's like, what's the comedic fault?
Yes.
They think that they're much smarter than they really are. Yeah. And so you think, okay, well, how is that going to show itself?
Yeah.
They're arrogant. And so then you have to do something which is called stress testing.
Yeah.
So you say, okay, if this character got arrested, how would they react?
Yes.
If this character got propositioned by someone, how would they react?
Yeah.
If this person, got invited to the wrong party, how would they react? Peter Sellers made an entire film about that, right?
Yeah.
If someone was rude to this person, how would they react? So you have to think under all circumstances, well, not all circumstances, but a lot of circumstances, how that character would react.
Yeah, what their motivations are.
Yeah. So then there's kind of frameworks about, well, what characters do you need about that? There's like families, mother, father, son, daughter, right. The Simpsons, Mike's the distant father, Neil is the abused mother, and the bratty children.
So build out their sort of character universe.
Yeah, build out the character. And, exactly right.
Yeah.
And then you put them in a situation, and then you go, okay, well, what is the story here? What's going to happen? Blackadder is going to tell the queen is going to discover her a new country.
Yes.
All right? Great. What happens? Then you go scene by scene breakdown.
Yeah.
What do? We start at Blackadder's house. Then we go to the throne room. Then we go to the tavern. Then we go to the boat. Then we go back to the throne room. And you notice things when you start kind of studying like that. You notice how in a half-hour show, there is a quickening of pace towards, the big payoff at the end.
Yeah.
So the scenes get shorter.
Right. So think about...
And it gives you a sense of dynamism in the actual flow of the show. You've got to be able to kind of like have your head around that.
Almost think about it on a meta level.
Absolutely.
Not just the scene.
No, but the length of the scenes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, okay, well, this first scene is going to be 4 or 5 minutes, which is a long scene. And then they're going to come down to being like 10 seconds. And then, boom, there's the big payoff. You write your scene by scene breakdown, who says what to whom and where they say it. I use coloured cards.
Okay.
Right?
So break it up and make it clear.
Yeah. Blue is the office. Yellow is the pub, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Then you've got the strong characters.
Yeah.
You've got the story. You've got the scene by scene breakdown.
Yeah.
Then you can fill it in. That's where you put in your dialogue.
Humor is so unique, so distinctive. How do you know it's funny?
You have banter with your friends, you know, you have banter with your partner or whatever, and they'll say something amusing and you'll go, oh, hold on. And you scribble that down. I'm using that. I'm nicking that, right?
Yeah, you collect all these nuggets from your lived experience.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes truth is funnier than fiction. And then you think, well, what would be the most arrogant thing someone could say here? What's the most ridiculous thing they could say? What is the most mind-bending piece of jargon I've heard this week?
Yeah.
How can I put that into the voice of a character to make them sound incomprehensible?
Yeah. I think I'd love to see you write a comedy one day about the Australian workplace in business or something like that. Because I've always said to my bosses through every job, one day I'm going to write the book about all the ribald things that happen in Australian workplaces, right?
Oh, you've got to watch that kind of thing. I mean, Charles Firth does it with his kind of like wankonomics thing. There's, of course, and of course there's the wonderful, Utopia. And Australian humour is typically dry, saucier than American humour. It's a bit more towards a British kind of end of things. My writing group and I wrote something recently. We entered in a competition and we got very, very good feedback. And it was an American competition, and they particularly said, you have a very unique sense of humour. And I wouldn't think that I do have a particularly unique sense of humour, but they were just...
By that reference point,
They're just not used to seeing it.
Very much hope, if the ABC's listening, Craig, I very much hope they pick up the script on their desk. We're almost out of time, and I always finish these podcasts with the same question. It's going to take you back to Bankstown, if that's okay. And it's really about childhood beliefs. Can you think of any childhood beliefs that you've had to let go of to become who you are today?
Things that I've let go of. I think that I imagined you have that idea of your parents, whether your parents, they're in charge. They were allowed to have children. They must know everything. Otherwise, why would they be in charge of me?
Yeah.
And then now I realize, having, stepped over the threshold out into the adult world, it's like, well, you just don't automatically become brilliant when you're 21 or something.
It's a long and winding road.
It's a long and winding road. Thank you, Paul McCartney. So I guess you just think, the teacher knows everything.
Deference to authority.
Yeah,
right?
he's got a nice car and exactly. And then I've had friends say to me, we had the baby, and then they just give you the baby.
Yeah.
And they send you home. It's like, I don't know how to look after a baby.
That's right. Yeah. Where's the manual?
Exactly. So you don't know, and you think like, okay, well, I was a troubled teenager. I can help out my son when he's a troubled teenager, but then he's kind of like, well, he doesn't want to care. He doesn't care what you think. Not interested in what you think. And that's what everybody goes through. I wouldn't have run off to my dad and said like, I'm really upset because some girl doesn't like me or whatever. So probably that idea that you figure, okay, well, you're 21 and suddenly the heavens open and a ray of sunshine tells you everything you need to know. And it's like, no.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. It's been wonderful to cover so much ground, from backstage at the music venue to the mean streets of Bankstown to the hallowed halls of academia, hopefully to the writer's desk at the ABC.
You never know. We'll see how that PhD goes first.
Thank you so much, Craig. It has been the Reinventor's Mindset. Now, before we finish up today's episode, I just wanted to invite you to please follow along and join the community that is exploring leadership on a deeper level through my newsletter at www.reinventorsmindset.com.